And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Steel Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of SteelCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Steel Curtain. Shayne and I talked yesterday a little bit about the Steelers win against the Titans. We're going to rehash that in just a second here. The big topic for today that we're going to do is what's going on with the Steelers offensive line. I want to get your thoughts, Shayne.
Yeah.
I'm going to share mine, and we're going to see if anybody else agrees with us about what the Steelers are doing here. We're also going to preview the Steelers versus Packers game coming up here in week 10 and talk about some of the biggest matchups and give our predictions for that. So Shayne, let's dive right into it with the Steelers win over the Titans in week 9. Big game. It was a must-have, really. I mean, you look at the AFC North right now, Shayne. Every team is 5-3 or better. It's the best division in football for my money. I think that if you look at like the Ravens in terms of DVOA, they're in a tier of their own above everybody else, that including teams like the Eagles and the 49ers. So this is a tough division, and the Steelers needed to come away with that win. They did that. It might not have been in the manner that we would have liked to have seen it get accomplished, but the Steelers, they got the win, albeit a close one. Shayne, go ahead and give us some maybe winners and losers from that one.
Yeah, I mean, this was a win they need to get against the team starting a quarterback only in a second start. As good as the first start looked, still a rookie quarterback. You don't want to lose that game. And admittedly, they took care of business, even if it took how they normally do it, which is come back in the fourth quarter. As far as winners go, I got to start with the running backs. Jaylen Warren, Najee Harris combo, go over 150 total yards and a touchdown from Najee. This is the run game that we've been wanting to see, right? Where Najee is the bell cow, like grind it out, occasional big play guy. And then Warren can come in fresh, be the change of pace back, and get the chunk plays in the running game. This is the ideal Steelers offense in terms of leaning on the run, letting Kenny Pickett have some pressure taken off of him. And you saw in the fourth quarter, as usual anyway, regardless, but especially when you factor in the run game helping out, that's when this offense can take off a little bit, right? This is when they can be an offense. So got to shout out those guys. Deontay Johnson, of course, leads the team receiving for the second time. And since he's come back from injury, he's playing at a level that gives them competency in the passing game when they target him, right? The other guys still need to come around a little bit more. We'll talk about George Pickens a little bit more later and his struggles in this game. But overall, like those three, I think, especially on offense at least, really kind of carried the load there.
Yeah, I agree with all those. And so you said right there, Jaylen Warren, and maybe the best game of his career so far. And props to the offensive line because the offensive line was just firing on all cylinders. I mean, the double team blocks. I thought the right side was amazing. The combination of James Daniels and Broderick Jones. And we're going to talk about the offensive line and what the Steelers should do as opposed to maybe what they are doing right now. What about the losers from this game, Shayne? Is there anybody that you want to kind of harp on a little bit?
I mean, George had a bad game. Pickens had a rough game by his standards. I know I mentioned it earlier. He had the touchdown that should have been a touchdown, but couldn't get both feet down, which for him is just weird. He's one of those guys where you just kind of expect him to make even the more difficult plays kind of routine. It's just kind of what you expect of him with his talent level. Doesn't do anything there. And honestly, the rest of the passing game, I mean, no one else besides Deontay really accomplished anything. And part of that is, Kenny missed a couple throws and he himself wasn't great, but of course he does his fourth quarter magic thing. He always does. So honestly, the rest of the offense, the pass game, I will say the pass blocking was better too. I don't really want to single anybody out there. We'll talk about the offensive line more anyway. But defensively, the secondary was still leaky at times. Like they gave up some weird chunk plays on third down. That's the thing that really bothered me. And that's really across the secondary. Other than Joey Porter Jr., he had a really locked down game for the most part. So there's definitely still issues with this team, and we'll talk more about them later. But overall, I have to say I was pretty impressed with the performance. So,
yeah, I mean, it was overall, I guess. Good enough to win the game. That's basically the best way I can describe it, Shayne. I want to see the Steelers win comfortably. We talked about that on yesterday's show. Pickens did not have a great game, although I mean the toe drag one, that's something he makes 9 times out of 10, if not more often than that. Right. But the rest of the targets to him, you really go and break down those pass quality, like missed on the crosser, just wide open, and Pickens would have had a big play after the catch. Where I knock Pickens, where I give him in the loser category is because of kind of the attitude and mannerisms that we saw from him during the game. And I know that everybody's just brushing it off, whatever. I don't want it to get to the point where it is a problem. And if you want to hear Shayne and I talk more about that, go jump on yesterday's show here on our Steel Curtain channel. Let's move on from that, Shayne, and talk about Cole Holcomb for a second here. Out for the season now. We knew this was coming. Pretty gruesome knee injury there. Knee got kind of buckled inside out, and just not the stuff that you want to see at all. I thought that Holcomb was having a very solid season overall. Maybe the best player on track to have the best linebacker play they've had maybe since Ryan Shazier's injury. And so you hate to see an injury like this occur. I think that Quan Alexander and Elandon Roberts are both very capable players, but now having to account for so many more snaps, it's going to be interesting to see what they do here. Does Mark Robinson get a piece of the pie? Do they go and look for help elsewhere? Do they play Herbig some snaps in the middle? Do you get 3 edge guys on the field at the same time, like some of these creative defensive coordinators are doing? I don't know if the Steelers are going to go that far, but I'll be interested to see what they do there.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate for Cole. And I did want to mention real quick, too, just because we didn't mention him, Alex Highsmith had one of the better games of his career in this game.
Yeah, he did, for
So I
sure.
just want to make sure we mention him. But with Holcomb being out, it looks like Quan, and I think you said it earlier today, that he will be wearing the green dot. He will be the primary linebacker for this team, which we kind of expected, right? With Roberts being more of that rundown specialist. But I think that things aren't as dire as maybe like we initially thought. We talked about yesterday, just because I do think Alexander getting that green dot, being the primary linebacker, gives me hope that they can continue that level of play for the most part. I don't think he's as consistent as Holcomb. I think he's more of a splash player in a lot of regards, but that's what we were missing last year, right? We didn't have those splash plays. Just in the last game, he makes the interception to end the game, Alexander. So we should still see a better level of play than we were getting the past couple of years. And really, even saying since Shazier, I would say the first couple games of 2020 for Devin Bush before his injury, that's the level of play that I think we really want to try to emulate, where he wasn't a superstar, but he wasn't making mistakes. He was aggressive, all that stuff. I'm hoping we get that out of Quan moving forward. So.
Yeah, and the aggressiveness is what we wanted to see. It's what we haven't seen in a couple of years now from the position. Last year, Devin Bush, Miles Jack, Robert Spillane, even, they kind of just let the play develop and come to them. And I feel like the Steelers linebackers this year, at least going downhill, they're attacking. I want to see, even without Holcomb now, I want to see the rest of the guys do those things. And I think that they'll be able to do that. Will they be able to make up for the rest of it? That's the part that'll be interesting to me. Let's get a few other topics in here before we get to our big discussion for today on the Steelers offensive line. Josh Dobbs shines with the Vikings. I want to give a little shout out to the former Steeler here. Really nice guy. I've talked to him in person a couple of times. We chat every once in a while. Just happy for this guy in the success that he's finding. And the situation is so bizarre. And if you're not aware of what happened, I mean, Dobbs was traded from Arizona to Minnesota and had 4 days to prep. Didn't get any reps with the first team offense at all. Kind of just came in. He didn't even know the names of some of his own players. And they were doing the cadence over on the sideline. Like Dobbs was practicing his cadence because they've literally never done that with him before. And so if you get a chance to look up any of that, it's really is a cool story. And Dobbs had this rough start to the game. I went back and watched that after the fact. He had a pretty rough start to the game, really turned it around. So just happy for that guy. I know he's not part of the Steelers anymore. And we're not going to get into the Kenny Pickett versus Josh Dobbs thing. I mean, the Steelers have issues of their own at quarterback. We all know that. But just happy that Dobbs is finding success still in the league.
Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous what happened on Sunday. It's almost unprecedented. Obviously we had the Baker Mayfield thing for the Rams last year where he showed up after 2 days and went and had to play. But that was a little bit different because one, Baker didn't score very many points in that game. He didn't have to because the Rams defense held the Raiders down. He also made some plays. It was basically just him going out there and backyarding it, right? Dobbs was making full field reads in this game. Mm-hmm. After being there for 4, I think Dobbs, to me at this point, he is the antithesis of Ryan Fitzpatrick. He is the opposite of him as a backup, where he's basically a professional quarterback for hire. If you need someone to run the offense tomorrow, you call Josh Dobbs. That's who this guy is. And I think that's awesome. And it makes sense with the the rocket scientist background, all that stuff like that. It's he's a smart guy, obviously. But to watch him go through his reads with players he's never played with guys he doesn't even know the name of, it was hilarious how many throws he made that were perfect reads and perfect throws. And I really hope that he can continue to start. As much as Jaren Hall looked very good for them as well before he got hurt, I would love to see Dobbs take this team to the playoffs or something. That'd be so funny in the NFC. Because you never know, right? With the NFC, you never, Brian Flores' defense is going crazy every other week. They're rushing 6 guys, like they're creating pressure. Like they could do something in the NFC if he plays at that level. So we'll have to see if it keeps up.
Yeah, just a great guy to root for, and the Pastronaut. Like you can't
Yes,
have a better nickname than that
cool.
for
That's
for
really
the
cool.
Astro. Yes. So love it. Martavis Bryant signed to the Cowboys practice squad.
Yeah.
Didn't know if this guy would ever make his way back into the league.
Yeah.
Kind of unfortunate how things ended for him. Man, at one point he was so good and so efficient. Maybe the best deep threat in the league at 6'4". And so I don't know if he'll do anything at age 31 and not even to their active roster. But I'm back in the NFL for now, at least.
I think it's interesting because he is the type of player that they are missing right now, where they don't like, because Brandon Cooks is not the true deep threat he once was anymore. I think he can still be valuable for them. They haven't really used him as much as I would think they should. But Michael Gallup, if you haven't been watching any Cowboys stuff, he is unplayable right now. This guy can't play. I do not understand what's going on with him. Like, because he was a very good
he had the ACL tear, but man, he's just not
right. Like it's
the
just
same at
he
all.
can't catch the ball. I feel like everything about his play is weird right now. So good for Martavis. We'll see if he can come back. You know, he kind of is doing the Josh Gordon thing in a lot of ways, if you want to put it that way. Coming back after several years out of the league. So we'll see if he has something left. I mean, if he has that speed at all still, he could be valuable for this team. So
that's what I'm curious about, Shayne. Like 31 years old now, you've been out of, I mean, not out of football, but out of the NFL for a while. Standard's a little bit different there. What does he run right now? Like, I'd be interested to see, does he have that gear where he could just gazelle stride past people like he used to? Does he have anything like that? Then you've got a guy that can contribute potentially. So I'm interested to see if he'll get that promotion up to the active roster and if he'll end up doing anything over there. And honestly, Shayne, and part of me said, man, I kind of would have liked that for the Steelers.
Right. Yeah.
So they could use all the help they can get at this point. Let's talk about one more thing here before we get into the Steelers offensive line. George Pickens' frustration. Mike Tomlin addressed this with the media, and Tomlin seems super irritated that how dare the media ask him questions about Pickens' attitude here. And I know there's just a range of opinions on this, Shayne. I kind of shared my thoughts on it already in detail in yesterday's show, so you can go check it out. I think that he's got to grow up a little bit. I think the maturity has to be a little bit better. If we can see how vividly frustrated he is just watching from our couch at home, then so can everybody else. And I'm sure his teammates can as well. He just needs to carry himself a little bit better, I think, and grow up a little bit in that regard. Again, not everything was his fault. Did not get good target quality at all in this game. Some missed opportunities. And yes, the missed opportunity on the touchdown, sure, you can argue the pass was a little too far out there. You really watch that, though. That's on Pickens. You got to drag the second toe. I mean, that's NFL receiver type play right there. So just overall, I hope that this is the biggest episode, I would say, I'd phrase it that way, Shayne, that we see from Pickens for the rest of the year.
Yeah, for me, I think that ultimately this is probably going to be a nothing burger at the end of the day. And you hope that that's what happens. And I hope that he does just kind of get out of his own head a little bit, because I think the problem for receivers, especially in offenses that are as bad as the one that we're playing in, you have to just worry about doing what you can do, right? You have to worry about running your routes well, getting open. If the ball doesn't come to you, it might just not come to you. And especially in an offense like this where there's not as many targets going around, because we don't throw the ball a ton. We don't throw the ball down the field a lot to a guy like him that would make good on those plays. Like, he has to just recognize, like, yeah, it's not that they don't think I'm good. It's that this offense just isn't really built to, have my strength shine right now. It's more about Deontay and the quick separation and all that stuff. So hopefully that changes, because I do think he should be the number one receiver at this point. Like, talent wise, and the way that you can use him is really just more explosive and more valuable. But he has to just learn to take his lumps for now, and he'll figure it out. So,
yeah, and the offense is just not there yet. I mean, we're talking about 188 passing yards a game, and if half of those or more are going to Deontay, that doesn't leave you a big piece of the pie left over. And we're not even talking about Freiermuth being in the mix, because the Steelers have not played a full game this year with George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Freiermuth.
Yeah, we have no idea what that looks like.
Johnson got injured in week 1. Freiermuth got injured several weeks back. Before the bye week, and that was against the Texans back in week 4. And so we have yet to see these guys all together. I hope that they can find a way to make it work and to please everybody. We want to see the passing game improve, obviously, and hopefully there'll be added opportunities for everybody there in the future. All right. If you guys are joining us here, please drop your questions for us in the live chat. We would love to be able to get to those.
Yeah, we have a few right now. if you wanted to
Okay, go
jump
ahead.
and do that real quick,
Go for it. Let's do it.
just because we have some. So we have returning chatter here. I have an old friend who works for the Buccaneers legal department who said he has heard from multiple people Chuka's bench for criticizing Kenny Pickett's play and lack of leadership. That would be insane if that's what he did, because I think there's a lot of issues with this team besides that, and that apparently that he is tired of the finger being pointed everywhere but where it needs to be pointed, and that Chuks has supporters in his opinion. We have no idea, right? Like, we have no idea what Chuks said. He has not said what he said, obviously. The Steelers have not said what he said. He's not going to say what he said, right? And I think that whatever it was clearly enough where, like, Tomlin didn't think he could be out there with the guys. And that does scare me a little bit, because if he did say something that other people also agree with, that could mean a locker room issue. But with this team, I have a hard time thinking there's any major locker room issues, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. But Chooks did admit that he was wrong. He didn't want to expand on
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
And I mean, I've heard the same rumors floating out there as well. If that ends up being the case, then again, Shayne, it's what we talked about yesterday. You're making the right choice getting Broderick into the lineup, but for the wrong reasons. Like, he should be in the lineup because he's a better player than Moore or not because disciplinary action for Chooks. So a guy that I wouldn't have thought before. I mean, I thought that Chooks was a pretty stand-up guy, and I think that he is, but it's interesting that this would be the reason why. And again, I don't want to speculate too much here until we've got something concrete here that is for sure what it is. So let's talk about this. Anything else that you wanted to get to, Shayne?
We are going to talk about something that they chatted about as well. So we'll get into it, and then I'll bring it up because it's about the offensive line situation here. So,
all right, let's do it. Steelers making some bizarre choices on the offensive line, at least in my opinion. I want to get your thoughts on this, Shayne, but I want to backtrack for a little bit here, because I wrote at the beginning of the season, I said, and I believe I said on our podcast right before the season too, I think if the choice were up to me, you have a uber talented former 5-star recruit, first round pick, 14th overall. You don't have much to work with at the offensive tackle position. My thought process from the very beginning, Shayne, was I think the Steelers should insert Broderick into the lineup. You take your lumps with him so that by midseason or so, you can have a guy that's got experience under his belt. He'll be somewhat established at that point, and then you can get on that track that you need to be on. The Steelers did not do that. And my prediction of what they would do, Shayne, is I said it would be very similar to Trubisky and Kenny Pickett situation last year, where 3 or 4 weeks in, they make the switch. Broderick becomes the full-time left tackle because we knew that Moore was going to be an issue, and he has been. That's not at all what happened. Now, Broderick did get one start at left tackle. It was in week 5 against the Ravens. I thought he played really well. He had a lot of reps against Jadeveon Clowney, who was able to build up ahead of steam in that wide 9 and just did an awesome job anchoring there. But the reason that he was in the lineup, Shayne, wasn't because he got a promotion. It was literally because Dan Moore was injured.
Yeah.
And then we saw it. And then we saw another game. Was it Moore was injured, or Chooks was injured and Moore's flipped? It was Moore was injured, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. He came in and played a little bit. Yeah.
I'm confusing myself right now, but he was in the lineup because of injury. Fast forward, that we thought coming out of the bye, all right, there's no way the Steelers are going back the other way. And we said, how dare they if they do? Well, guess what? Moore was back to being healthy, inserted back into the lineup. So you're back to Dan Moore and Chuks Okorafor as your 2 offensive tackles. Jones goes back to the bench. Now he comes into the lineup. Surprisingly, this past week, we learned just hours before the game that he would be starting at right tackle. And supposedly it's because of disciplinary measures. Again, it's not because Broderick is the better option or the more talented football player. It's because of disciplinary action. And so I think the collection of things that Mike Tomlin and Pat Meyer have done with the offensive line so far have been bizarre, to say the least. Like, you have a guy who, I mean, hypothetically should be by far the most talented player on this unit. He's the only one of these guys that was the former first-round pick. He is the guy that you just drafted 14th overall and you traded up for in the first round. And he's only gotten 2 starts entering week 10 because of other occurrences that happened to the offensive tackles, not because he earned them. But when we watch him play, Shayne, and I go back and watch these games again, Broderick has earned it. In my mind, he has earned the job. Now, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe he's not getting something in the film room, or maybe he's not trying very hard. Not going to speculate there again when we don't know the exact situation. But if we're just judging it off the film, Broderick is tiers above these guys in terms of talent. Like I know they're all have a similar size and frame, but when it comes to like anchoring strength and essentially everything that he does, he's just better at, and that you can't find a way to get him on the field sooner. And that you're just now making this switch. And like, this is the first time that like Tomlin is saying like early in the week that Broderick is going to do that, or at least he hinted that. He didn't even say completely, but he hinted that Broderick is going to get that role. It's worth noting that Brooke Pryor of ESPN pointed out that Broderick is now listed as the starting right tackle in Steelers depth chart. And so it's like, all right, you're in the lineup. We knew that needed to happen. You're at right tackle. Is that the lesser of two evils? Is keeping Dan Moore at left tackle a good option? He's the 72nd graded offensive tackle out of 77 qualifying players. If you care about that at all, the film backs up that he's been having a very rough season. Yeah. And again, I don't think that either one are the long-term answer. What is the best option, Shayne? What is the best 5-man lineup that you can go with, and who should be starting at both tackle positions?
See, this is where it's difficult because, and that's why I wanted to wait till we get here to talk about this chat that was thrown out there. And I did see this as well. Also, Moore apparently was so god awful at right tackle they had no choice but to move Jones. All plans are Jones to return to left tackle at some point. That makes sense to me, and that's kind of what the feeling has been, is that Moore isn't ready to play right tackle right now, that he can't play anything but left tackle at a playable level. And if that's the case, then this makes some sense. And obviously, Chuks being sent out because of why he was sent out, and this being why it's happening, is frustrating because, like you said, we all see that Jones is the best player on this offensive line, at least the tackle right now, right? Like, it's very painfully obvious. And that is not saying that he's like an all-world tackle right now. It's more about the play of the other two guys, right? Like that's where we're at right now. And the fact that it did take some shenanigans essentially to get him on the field again after what he showed in his one start at left tackle, I just wonder, like, it can't be simply a performance thing, because I know these guys know as well as we do that they're not playing well, right? So I don't know if, like you said, it is a situation where maybe they just don't think he is ready to take all these snaps, or there's something he's missing in practice or whatever. But whatever is missing is not affecting him on the field so far. Like, he's not been a guy that's been, getting a ton of penalties or been a liability in any real way at all. So at this point, I think they have to trust the film and trust their eyes and say, okay, this guy needs to play. And if it has to be a right tackle to get him on the field because you don't like the other ways you can do it, that's fine. I still think he needs to be the left tackle of this team in the future, whether that's next year or whatever, that's fine. As long as you have him in your lineup, you're probably having one of the top 5 lineups you could have, right? I would even consider, if Chuks is at a point where you're okay with him being back in lineup, he's played left tackle plenty. Let him go out there and play left tackle instead of Moore. Moore goes to the bench. That's probably your best 5-man lineup right now. Maybe the interior, like, obviously Mason Cole's had his ups and downs, mostly downs this year, but if he's going to stay at center, having those two as the left and right tackle might be the best move then. It just depends. Like, and then you can maybe move, again, Jones back to left tackle if you want Chuks to stay, right? Whatever it is, those two I think are still the best tackles you could play.
Yeah, my fear, Shayne, is that the Steelers are going to ultimately end up failing Broderick Jones. Now, I hope the talent wins out anyway. But you're talking about a guy, like, from high school to this point, has primarily been a left tackle. That's where most of his starts came, and he didn't have that many to begin with at Georgia because he was sitting behind Andrew Thomas and then Jamari Salyer, who were both draft picks, and Thomas was one of the highest draft picks that year. Yeah. Now you come in and you don't have a ton of experience at right tackle, even throughout training camp, like getting most of the reps on the left side. Is it worth risking to fail your potential long-term blindside tackle to move him in a role that he might not be as comfortable with, just because Dan Moore's not as comfortable there? If that is indeed the reason, or is it strictly because disciplinary action from Chuks? But at the same time, like you said, if Dan Moore now at this stage in his career can't kick over to the right side and he's not good at the left side, I mean, is he even good to be a swing tackle? I mean, that's what you have to ask. And so, Shayne, I think you and I both agree at this point that the Steelers have one starting tackle on their offensive line on the roster. I mean, that other guy that's going to be the long-term option next to Broderick is not there yet. No. And so theoretically, if Broderick were to start the rest of the season at right tackle and he plays pretty well there, then that's an awesome sign. And what you still need is another guy to pair with him. So whether that's a true right tackle and you move Broderick back to the left side, or you get the left tackle however that works out, they're not ready yet. They're not there yet. And I think that both Dan Moore and Chooks have been given, honestly, more time than they should have starting at their respective positions. It's time to move on from that. And I mean, kudos to the Steelers for finally addressing the offensive tackle position in the first round for the first time, since 1996 when they took Jermaine Stevens.
Yeah.
So they need to do it again. And it's a position, Shayne, where I'm feeling like right now, at least, I would not mind them throwing another first round pick at it next year in a pretty good tackle class.
It's tough too, because what you said about Broderick and like failing him, I think the good thing is that he was more than capable at right tackle in his first start there. Like that tells you that it's not so much like, I don't think they are going to ruin him by playing him at right tackle, because he already looks pretty comfortable there. So I do think ultimately it's best for him to be a left tackle, because it's the more valuable position, even though nowadays more and more it's kind of like you just, whatever tackle you are, you have to deal with the same pass rushers. But unless you're playing the Steelers, but that's another thing. but I do agree that, like, if you are going to play him at right tackle, you have to decide going into next season, is he going to be your left tackle of the future, or is he going to be your right tackle of the future? Because you might have to draft a guy, and you probably should draft a guy early next year, and they might not be able to play whatever tackle spot, right? So you have to know, okay, what position is Broderick Jones actually going to be playing for us? And then you can determine what the right type of tackle you want to draft next year is. So that's the thing I'm most worried about. Not so much about Broderick being ruined, but like, what position do they want him to play ultimately? So,
yeah. And even in his first start at right tackle, I mean, if we're being honest, it's as good as anything that we've seen from either of those guys. Really, the kick slide, the anchoring strength, like
the run game stuff is crazy.
The run game, the power in the run game, it's just traits that Dan Moore and Okorafor do not possess. And I think my biggest issue with the entire thing, Shayne, is it just seemed like backward logic on Mike Tomlin's part to me to say, all right, Chooks, you've been here since 2018. You're not going to be the guy for whatever reason, if you got disciplined, whatever. Dan Moore, you've been here since 2021. And yet we feel more comfortable sliding the guy then that's played like a handful of snaps this year. You're going to go over and play that spot now, even though you haven't done it before. So, I mean, maybe it works out for the best, and maybe Broderick becomes one of the better right tackles in the league. We'll see how this thing plays out. It's just interesting. And it's something that I wanted to bring up because I don't hear a lot of other people talking about it. They did mention how it was a little bit strange before the game that he was going to right tackle. But I want to see how this thing plays out. Like if we're still getting like a really, really badly struggling Dan Moore, I don't know if you can stick with this very long. I think you're going to have to revert back and kind of put Chooks back in there reluctantly and put Broderick back to the other side, but we'll see how it plays out here. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's shift gears here. We're going to talk Steelers versus Packers, week 10, big game for Pittsburgh because theoretically the Steelers can go to last place in the division this week if with a loss and with wins by their AFC North rivals. And so we talked about how no team is worse than 5-3 in that division right now. It's tight. You can't drop a game, especially to kind of just a mediocre team like the Packers have been for most of the year. I mean, in terms of stats, if we're just looking at stats, the Packers might be a better team on paper than what the Steelers have been so far. They're averaging 20 points a game. They're giving up 20 points a game. I mean, they're break even in that department. They're a little bit better when it comes to EPA in those type of stats. But they're also, I mean, they're one of these odd teams, Shayne, because they remind me a little bit of like the current New England Patriots. There's just like no star power on this team. Like you've got some quality football players. You've got some depth at certain positions, but it's like you don't have like these super imposing like all pro or even like Pro Bowl caliber players outside of just a couple positions on their team. And so I want to break down some of the bigger matchups to watch in this game. The Steelers are 3-point home favorites. Surprisingly, this is the third straight home game that the Steelers will have in this 3-game stretch. They need to come away with this with a winning record. Obviously, they're 1-1 as we sit. They lost to the Jaguars by 2 scores. And then they beat the Titans with that game-winning drive on Thursday Night Football. They've got to come away and get out of the stretch at 2-1. So only 3-point favorites. So that means that on a neutral playing field, this would be a pick'em type game. So the odds makers are not, I mean, they're not big believers in the Steelers right now. We'll see if that line gets bet in a different direction here over under for this game, 39 points. Are those things fair for the Steelers?
I think they are fair, and I think it tells you a lot about what the consensus is on the Steelers in terms of their record not meaning as much as people probably think it should, right? Where like the Packers have really struggled the past few weeks, especially, and they did win last week. I mean, but it felt like they didn't even want to. The team they played didn't even want to show up. I won't even say anything more than that. Point is that Jordan Love especially struggled. We'll talk more about him. This offense is just very immature, is how I'll describe it. We'll talk more about that, but I think the line makes sense. Again, I think these teams are similar caliber teams, defensive first teams that have offenses that haven't found their way this year for different reasons. And the over under 39, I think that's definitely fair. I mean, they only scored 20 points. We don't even score 20 points. I think getting to 40 combined is going to be a struggle ultimately, but we'll kind of see how that plays out. But I think it's fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that the Steelers should be favored by much more based on what we've seen. And obviously the Steelers are 5-3. The Packers are 3-5. But like I said, on paper, these are similar football teams, and a Packers fan could certainly come out and make the case that they've been a better team, but with a worse record. It's kind of weird how it's working out. And we know that. Like we have the Steelers are setting records. They're making history in a not so great way so far. Shayne. They're the only team in NFL history at this point in the season to have a winning record, despite being outgained in yardage in every single game that they've played this year. And so the likelihood of you being 2 games above 500 at this point, knowing the circumstances and the fact that you've been outgained in every single game is kind of bizarre. And so we can't expect that trend to continue unless the overall play continues. I mean, the luck is going to run out at some point. You can have the clutch, just whatever.
You assume. Yeah.
Yes, but when you're scoring 16 points a game and you allow 340 yards on defense and just all these stats, the Steelers are like 29th or lower in the NFL. Like you can't have a collection of those things and expect to have lasting success. So we'll see how this plays out here. Let's talk about some of these matchups here this week. It sounds like the Packers kind of have a similar situation going on at their left tackle position, kind of like the Steelers do on their offensive line, where they don't like either guy. It kind of reminds me of like Dan Moore or Corfor. You're trying to pick the lesser of two evils there between Rasheed Walker and Josh Nijman. And I don't know. I think that the plan is to start him this game. I think they started Yinman last week, and he ended up exiting that contest, and Walker came back in. So, either way, this should be a matchup that Alex Highsmith should take advantage of, especially coming off of maybe the best game of his career so far. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it sucks for Rasheed Walker because he started the season very strong. And I think that the rest of the injuries around the offensive line and just the offense not playing well kind of made him get exposed a little bit more than he was early in the season. He's a really talented guy out of Penn State. They drafted, I think, in the 6th or 7th round a couple years ago. And I think that he's a player that has the talent to stick at left tackle and be a solid player, but he's shoved into the situation because of David Bakhtiari just not being able to play football for a long time. And it sucks for them. But you're right. So Highsmith should win this matchup regardless of who ends up playing there. He's going to be the better player by a wide margin, whoever it is. Neiman gives you more the veteran and just has more experience there, so he'd probably be a tougher matchup. But Walker does have the athleticism compared to him, so it's really a pick your poison. Whoever ends up playing and playing most of the snaps is going to have his hands full, though.
Yeah, and on the opposite side over there is Zach Tom, who's having a really good season at right tackle.
He's a very good player.
So it makes me wonder if they are going to be a little bit more neutral in the way that they shift the attention. Like, will Highsmith get some of it if he's really beaten up?
They might have to.
Whoever they deploy out there. So far, and like we said, what we've seen when we go back and watch the film since week 4, when the Texans really figured out, it's like we're going to put 2 or 3 guys. We're going to have that running back or tight end Chip Watt, essentially every pass rush rep. And when we do that, we're going to neutralize the best player on their football team. And other teams have followed suit since then. We'll see if Packers do as well, because theoretically, this is a matchup that Highsmith definitely should be able to exploit on that side. The Highsmith just seems to be getting better each game. So it might be a mistake on their part if they deployed too much attention to Watt this week. So keep an eye on that one there. I want to talk about the Steelers running backs against the Packers linebackers. I think the strength of their team is probably those linebackers for the Packers: Quay Walker, Devontae Campbell. I mean, that's a quality pairing of football players who are both having really strong seasons. The Steelers running backs are coming off collectively one of the better games they've had together, dating back since the beginning of last year when Jaylen Warren was first with the team. Can they keep up that momentum this week against those linebackers and that defensive front by the Packers?
Yeah, I think this is where the Steelers can win, and it's not so much because of the linebackers. It's really the way the Packers play defense. They're very much a heavy, like Vic Fangio, like quarters heavy team that is going to give up a lot of rushing yards if they play a team that's capable of running the football, right? And with a big back like Harris and a speedier back like Warren, like it's a matchup we should be able to win. I think the question is, can we keep up with them enough? And hopefully so with the way their offense is playing, to be able to lean on the run game, right? To stay with it. Because we've seen games get out of hand for the Steelers and they go away from the run game early and don't come back to it. That can't happen against a Packers team that you can attack in the run game. Like that's where this team is the most susceptible. So they should have the advantage. I think it comes down to the offensive line has to be able to get to the second level on these linebackers and safeties that have to come up from their quarters responsibilities and tackle these guys. If they can do that, I expect them to win that matchup pretty easily.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the Packers would be willing to alter their defensive game plan a little
So
bit
far,
from the
no.
quarters. It's interesting though, because now
Yeah.
if they're watching film on the Steelers,
Yes.
Shane, and they see, all right, Kenny Pickett's coming off, he completed 18 of 30 passes for 160 yards last week. I mean, their passing offense cannot get going. They're averaging less than one passing score per game. Maybe they do put a little bit more attention on the running game, and maybe they're not. Maybe they'll just stick with what they know.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then you're right. The Steelers running game should be able to exploit that. It probably means bad things for the passing game when they do try to look there. But if we can get the running game going, that's definitely a start, and it's something that they'll have to be able to do in this game. At the same time, I want to look at the Steelers linebackers now. Cole Holcomb-less linebacker group against a pair of quality linebacker or running backs of the Green Bay Packers, and Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, two guys that can exploit you on the ground at times. I know they haven't quite been the same duo that they've been in the past, but two pretty good football players still.
Yeah. So the thing with AJ Dillon is he might be the worst running back playing in the NFL right now at times. He has zero, like what people think Najee Harris is what AJ Dillon is. Like people who really hate Najee, that's who AJ Dillon is. Like he has zero burst, zero speed, doesn't even have the power that you want from a guy that's 230 plus pounds, just having a rough season. Like if you look at his underlying metrics, he has like the lowest running success rate and also the lowest like explosive run rate. Like he's doing nothing effectively. And so it's really about Aaron Jones, right? Can you handle him? Because he's the guy that could go off for 200 total yards of offense and 3 touchdowns. Like this is the guy that can do that. Now, do I think he will based on what we've seen this year with the way the offensive line is playing and the quarterback play kind of not taking pressure off of him? Probably not, but this is a team that's been susceptible to the big play in the run sometimes this year, right? So they have to really worry about bottling him up. Dillon is just going to be the grinded out, get 2 or 3 yards guy. We can live with that. It's not going to be that successful against really anybody. It hasn't been this year. It's can you keep Jones at bay in the passing game too, not just in the running game? That's going to be too for especially Quan, I would say.
Yeah, and AJ Dillon is interesting because I remember him coming out of Boston College and being like,
I like
this guy looks the part. Like he absolutely looks the part. He looks like that Derrick Henry mold of player, which is really rare. But you're right, he just hasn't done a ton for them.
Especially
like
this year.
Always been disappointing. Yeah. What a terrible pick he's been for my dynasty league too. That's a different topic. Let's talk about this. And another guy who's not performing particularly well, but has the speed to kill the Steelers, and that is Christian Watson, their receiver that's 6'4" and runs a 4.36. Like Watson was terrific in the second half of last year and really inefficient for the Packers in the receiving game so far this year. But even like last week, we saw he had a 37-yard reception. Like if Porter's not matched up against him, he has the potential to kill you down the field. And obviously this works both ways. Like Jordan Love has to be firing as well. But give up a few plays like that. And I mean, they could call ball game on the Steelers because we know how hard it is for them to fight back into these contests. So does that scare you at all? Does his presence scare you at all this week?
It scares me because he is a one-play touchdown guy. Like this is the guy that you throw him a crosser and he can run away from everybody up the sideline. Or you throw him just a go ball, and I think that's why it's going to be really important that Porter does try to be on him as much as possible. Because the other thing with Watson, he's 6'5". Like this is not a normal deep threat receiver. This is a Mike Evans size receiver that has 4.3 speed. Like that's what we're kind of dealing with. And as much as I'm not super worried about it because that connection hasn't been there this year, and I just don't know if it's really going to happen this year for this offense. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit with Jordan Love. But they just, I think as long as Porter's on there, his length will match up well with his length with Watson. Like that's the matchup. Now, if he gets on Patrick Peterson or Levi Wallace, yeah, he's going to be open. It's just whether Jordan Love finds him or is willing to throw the ball. So got to have safety help over the top as well, just in case, especially if Porter's not on him. But they got to be physical with him because if he gets a free release, yeah, he'll probably be open. So.
Yeah, and I remember watching him there at North Dakota State and just seeing just how fast he can
He's just
blow
so much
by
better than everybody
those
else.
gazelle strides. And my confidence, I watched him last year. I'm like, man, he has so many Martavis-like traits, like prime Martavis, where he can take a drag route and take it 40 yards because he can just long stride past everybody. So it does scare me a little bit knowing how old and slow the secondary is, knowing that Minka is still dealing with injury, and you really got Porter out there. I mean, that's the guy that I want to see him matched up against. Like, I also like Porter against like Romeo Doubs, and I want him to, I think Porter, we're fairly safe. Whoever he's going against, it's obviously everybody else, right? What can those guys do? I would like the matchup, like get like Peterson on Romeo Doubs, who's not as great of an athlete, who can stick with him a little bit easier, maybe. So I'll be interested to see if Porter follows this week, if he's just going to stick to one side or what he's going to do. So keep an eye on that game plan for the Steelers. All right, Shayne, I want to talk about Kenny Pickett again. All right, so back in week 4, we talked about Kenny Pickett versus CJ Stroud. Why it was kind of a big game to see these two head-to-head. Obviously, Stroud certainly got the better of that matchup. Steelers lose 30-6. This past week, we previewed Kenny Pickett against Will Levis, and two guys who were similar status, kind of coming out of college. Pickett was the first pick in the draft in 2022. Levis fell to the top of the second round this past year's draft. And the Steelers came away victorious. Levis made some questionable decisions in that game down the stretch. I thought he had some really nice throws. Also, if you look at Levis the week prior, in week 8, had an awesome game, a 4-touchdown, 238 yards, I believe, on like 28 or 29 attempts. So it was a really good game by him. Now we're looking at Kenny Pickett versus Jordan Love. This is the level that we've gotten to now, Shayne. And I don't want to be too hard on Pickett here, but if we're looking at a guy who's kind of been in his tier and shares some similarities, I mean, you could argue that that's Jordan Love. I mean, Jordan Love was drafted a couple of years ago to be kind of that developmental behind Aaron Rodgers to replace him. Interestingly, though, Kenny Pickett is older than Love by nearly half of a year. Yeah. These guys are both former first-round picks. Pickett needs to outplay him. I'm sorry. You have to outplay Jordan Love. You're at home for the 3rd straight game. Jordan Love has not been very good in terms of like statistical production. He has more than what Kenny does. And some of that is what the offense is allowing for. But at the same time, you cannot let a struggling Jordan Love come into your city in your 3rd straight home game and show you up like this. Pickett has been outplayed consistently by these other younger quarterbacks, and now he's facing again a younger quarterback. Although Love's been in the league 1 year longer, he did not start the past 2 years, obviously, because he was sitting behind Aaron Rodgers. So he's still lacking in experience, and he's a fairly young guy himself still. This one, I don't know if anybody's talking about Kenny Pickett against Jordan Love right now, just because it's not like a premier matchup or anything. But I can't see Kenny Pickett getting outplayed by another quarterback that's younger than he is. It's just, I don't want it to be any more discouraging than the route that we've seen so far.
I think it's interesting we talk about these two together because I think they're different sides of the same coin, where they're both considered developmental type quarterbacks, but the reason why they're not playing that great is for different reasons. Love can't stop turning the football over, but does make some big plays occasionally. Kenny's really good at protecting the football, but can't find that big play ability, right? And there's reasons for that. Like, obviously, the offense isn't built to create big plays, so there's an element of that when you're talking about Kenny Pickett. But he does miss too many layups right now. He is missing some reads, missing some throws. Love's accuracy has been kind of disastrous for this team this year. That's the biggest thing that he needs to continue to work on is his ball placement and accuracy, because there's been some big plays there that he's straight up missed. Not that Kenny hasn't also missed a couple of those, but there's a lot more opportunities for that in the Packers offense and the Steelers offense, and Love is still not making them. I think it's really – I'm going to be curious to see how they kind of attack this game, because I think with the Steelers secondary, there's big plays to be had, but it's can you protect them, Love well enough for him to find those guys down the field. So far, that's been no for this Packers offense. And they're very immature. And I mentioned it earlier in the sense that LaFleur is a veteran play caller. He's a very good coach, but he isn't calling plays as well as I would like him to in general. A lot of guys, like the spacing isn't there a lot of the time, and that's been bothersome. But also, like, these receivers are just so young. I mean, he has all these guys out there that have less experience than he does, basically, in terms of being in the NFL. Like, that's not a great recipe for success with a young quarterback, where you have a rookie tight end, 2 second-year receivers, a rookie receiver in Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed, who are kind of the other, 3 and 4 receivers there. Like, there's just no one there to rely on, right? There's nobody there that he can say, okay, I know this guy's going to be able to get open. I know this guy's going to do what he's supposed to do. And I think it's killing the Packers offense right now versus Kenny, where you do have some veterans like Deontay. You do have guys like even Najee Harris has been in the league for a while now. Like, you have guys you can rely on to do the right thing, but he's just not living up to what I think people wanted him to be. So I am curious to see how these two play in general. I think it's going to be a rough day for both to a certain degree, but I do give Pickett the edge being at home. And I do think that his overall surrounding cast is better right now for what he does well.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see it. And you talked about it. I mean, they're both coming from somewhat difficult situations.
Yes.
Packers because of the youth, Steelers because of the suspect play calling at times.
Mentality.
Although I think that's been better in the last couple of weeks in the
offensive
mentality
line play. For me, I think at this point,
So,
right? Like, that's really the biggest hang up is even if the offense is called well, it's called well to be a certain type of offense that limits the ceiling, right? Like that's
it is. It is. And I think that I mean, this is my thoughts on these two guys. Like, I was not a huge Jordan Love fan coming out. I was not a huge Kenny Pickett fan coming out. I had second round grades on both of these guys. And I mean, to be quite honest, they're playing like the players that I kind of predicted that they would be. Now, I want to see that Pickett exceed my expectations. I think it needs to start right here, because if you go, like I said, if you go and get kind of shown up again by another rookie quarterback, and again, Pickett got the last laugh on Will Levis. But when we watch Levis play, you can see just how much he oozes with the upside, with the whip of an arm and all the throws that he can make. I think that throughout his career, for however long that's going to be, Pickett's going to have to make up for some of those things, because he doesn't have he doesn't have a live NFL arm like a Josh Allen or one of these guys that can just sling the ball all over the place. I love his mobility. He needs to clean up the accuracy issues that we've seen over the past a few weeks, and there's a couple of big missed throws there. But come out swinging, get the best of Jordan Love in this matchup. Like, I want to just see you take him down. Can we see, please? I want to see the Steelers win by like 10 points. I just want
if there's a week to do it, this is a week to do it. You're facing a Packers team that isn't that great, that has a lot of issues. The defense could totally be one of those weeks where they keep a team to like 10 points. Can the offense just get a couple touchdowns, get out of here with a comfortable win, and try to keep pace? And like you said, in the AFC North, that is just downright just insane right now. Like, I don't know if we mentioned it before on the last week's show or this show or whatever, but this is the first time that all 4 teams in the division are 2 games above 500 this late in the season since they redid the division. Wow. Like, it has not happened. This division, as weird as it is, and as kind of weirdly bad as it can be, depending on what team you're looking at, is the most difficult division to play in the NFL. It has been that way for a long time. It continues to be that way. And this is the type of game that the Steelers can't afford to lose.
Yep. And like we said, the Packers, they're not overflowing with star power either. They've got young players. They got a young quarterback. And the Steelers have had 10 days to prepare for this game. It's going to be 10 days in all. They played the Thursday night game. There's no excuses in this one. And that brings us to our predictions here, Shayne, before we sign off for today's show. Let's talk about the key to success on the offensive side of the ball. What do the Steelers need to do to come away victorious?
I think we talked about earlier, you have to be able to run on this defense that is a
Mhm.
very rigid quarters, primarily quarters defense that is going to give you stuff in underneath in the passing game and in the running game. And I think that is where like the Steelers passing offense, because of its conservative nature, it might actually work to their benefit in a matchup like this, where they are going to have underneath throws. They're going to have a lot of soft coverage. Like the stuff that they try to do on early downs in the passing game might have a better chance of working against a team like this. But if you do need a big play down the field, it is going to be difficult to find that. So you do need to stay patient with the running game and the short passing game and kind of let the Packers scheme give you an edge, essentially. And I think that's totally possible with this team.
Yeah, the running game is obviously going to be key in this one. You have to see that success continue this week. I think also you need a balanced approach to your passing game. You got to
Yeah.
keep these receivers happy. Deontay, I think, has been playing really well. Pickens obviously coming off of one of the worst games of his career so far, finished the game with -1 yard. You'd like to see that be a little bit more balanced there. And I think
Yeah.
it's going to help everybody out because, I mean,
Yes.
the game on paper from Kenny, and not just on paper, you go back and watch the film. I mean, there were missed opportunities. It was a pretty sluggish game overall. I just think the passing game needs to start firing a little bit better here and more
Yes.
consistently.
Sooner,
Because
especially.
again, and sooner. I mean, Pickett has 6 passing touchdowns entering week 10. Like this is not the start that everybody
Yeah.
envisioned. And I was foolish enough, Shayne, at the beginning of the year to place a bet because the number was so low. It was like 19 and a half, over under 19 and a half touchdowns for Kenny Pickett this year. I'm like, over. Like, I think he's going to get like 22, 23, not even close to that
Yeah.
pace right now.
Yeah. He's going to
So
have to catch up for you here.
the passing game is far worse this year than what I anticipated it being. It needs to start getting better. Like down the stretch, we're now halfway through the season. The second half of the year, it needs to be twice as good. But I think it needs to be
quite
twice
literally
as
twice
good
as
as
good.
it almost does. And by the end
Yeah.
of the year, for me to be comfortable saying, yes, I like what we have going into 2024. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. I know I'm getting kind of futuristic here, but just for this game specifically, like it's got to start here. You've got the third straight home game. You're doing it against a team you should be able to exploit at least enough. You've game planned them for them enough. You've had that extra time to prepare. Come out firing. Let's put up 28 points on offense. Let's have a good offensive game that it's have 260 offensive passing yards and a pair of touchdowns or something like that. Like, let's
That'd be
get this
great.
thing rolling in the
that'd
right
be great.
direction. Key to success on defense, Shayne. What do the Steelers need to do defensively to contain the Packers?
You have to be able to get after Love and force him into the mistakes that we've seen from him because he's already not the most accurate quarterback. You get him pressured, I think he becomes less of an accurate quarterback and more erratic. We've seen some really boneheaded decisions from him, especially late in games where they do have to come back. So if you can get a lead on this team and force him into bad plays, you can kind of bury them and put it to rest. That's got to be the number one thing. And it's always the number one thing with the Steelers is getting pressure, but more so, especially in this week where you do have a young quarterback that's still struggling to handle that pressure. That is the number one thing. And then you have to limit the big plays. Like don't let Christian Watson get behind you. Don't let Romeo Doubs go up the sideline on you and catch like one of those fade balls that the Pickens is so good at. Like you have to be able to force them to have to consistently move the football down the field and be consistent because they aren't right now, right? They're so young. They're kind of relying on those chunk plays to happen to get things moving. Making them march the field is probably your best bet at stopping them consistently.
Yeah, I mean, it always comes down to the pressure. I mean, the Steelers' defense is predicated around getting pressure. So I think that you hit it, Shayne. If they're able to get to Love fast, this game is going to flow the way that Steelers want it to. If for whatever reason they're not able to do that, I do worry about giving up some of these big plays, these chunk plays down the field, and then maybe not being able to match on the offensive side of the ball. So I think it's getting there quickly and getting Jordan Love uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I think the Steelers, again, what we've seen, it's a trend now. We can't expect the Steelers to win these shootout type games. Keep the offense in check there.
Yeah, we had a chat real quick I want to throw out before we do our predictions. Do you think we ever had a game where Kenny was clearly, but I'm trying to think to last year. I feel like
It would have
maybe
to be
this
last year somewhere because I'm thinking
yeah,
of every game this year, and I can't think of one where, I mean,
he's
week 1 they played the
clearly
49ers.
better.
He wasn't better than Purdy there, not even close. The Browns game,
Maybe
Watson was pretty bad in that game.
yeah, Watson's pretty bad.
So, but even then, I mean, outside of the takeaways, which I mean, the pick six was pretty brutal, but that was kind of off of a tip pass. So, The Raiders game. That's probably the one.
That's the one I was going to say. Was Derek Carr
So
was dreadful in that game, and Kenny at least
yeah,
had his fourth quarter
Garoppolo.
magic.
Yeah,
Well, last
yeah.
year. Oh, I thought you were talking about last year.
Oh, I was talking about this year's
Oh, this year's
Sunday
too.
Night
I would
Football
say,
game.
yeah, this year too.
Okay.
But last year when Carr was, remember how bad Carr was in
Okay.
the
Yeah.
game
Yeah.
for Franco Harris.
Mhm.
Like that was dreadful
That
too.
was
So
such a bad
yeah,
offensive performance
yeah,
overall until the last drive.
yeah. That might have been another one. But yeah, I get what you're saying
Mhm.
there.
It is a
It's
fair
tough.
point. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
tough.
21 games into your career. You'd like to see more than stretching for a game or two or three where Pickett has been the better quarterback. And
Yeah,
I think that all of these concerns are justified. I really
yeah.
do. And again, I want to eat my words, and I'll be the first to come back and say that I was so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to see we need to see that improvement. So I definitely agree
Absolutely.
with that. All right, Shayne, let's give our predictions and we'll sign off here on today's show. Steelers versus Packers. Again, third straight home game for the Steelers. It really is. I mean, every game in the NFL is so important. You only play 17 games. It's not like baseball or basketball or these other sports where you can go on a long skid and still be all right. You've got to win it, especially when your division is this tight, especially
Yeah.
when the AFC conference in general is as tight as what it is. And there's going to be so many of these 5-3-ish teams. There's 6 teams tied with that record right now in the NFL that are vying for those final 3 spots in the wild card. I don't want to say that the division is out of reach, but it looks really, really tough against a stout Ravens team that's just playing well on both sides of the ball. So catching back up, they do though own the tiebreaker there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in their next head-to-head matchup late in the year. But for now, let's just focus on staying in that wild card race. Can the Steelers get it done this week? What's your score prediction?
So I do think they're going to get it done at home against a Packers team that just isn't that great. I do think they have a lot of their own issues, and this is the type of team the Steelers can routinely beat because they are so young and immature and have their issues on defense even at times, despite the fact they've been pretty good at not allowing a ton of points. I will say 21-13, so not quite a 2-score win technically, but close enough. I think it's relatively comfortable. I think the Packers get a field goal later so to make it a 1-score game, and then they just can't finish the game off from there. I want to say Pickett throws 2 touchdowns just because I want to see it happen. This is a team that could allow that for sure, depending on the situation, but definitely 21-13 feels about right.
All right, I've got the Steelers as well at 20-16. I think
Same
that it'll
score as
be
last week. There you go.
yeah. I think it's going to be a little bit.
That's a
It's one
Steelers
of those
win.
types of games again. I mean, that's it. That's what they do. So
Yeah.
again, the Steelers are -30 in point differential on the season so far. Not where you want to be. I mean, there's this teams as high as like +125 right now. Like it's insane. The
Yeah.
discrepancy between the top teams and where the Steelers are right now, which they sit at 24th in that department in the NFL. I think, again, until I see proven otherwise, if they are to win this game, and I think that they will, it's going to be a close game, like a field goal or maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
And I hope that your score is more right than mine.
Right.
At least that's a little bit more encouraging. Although, I mean, it's the offense just having a very blah game probably
Yes.
still.
Yeah.
I've got the Steelers 20-16. If you guys have any score predictions or game predictions at all, please drop them in the chat on this YouTube page. We would love to be able to hear those and reply to you. Thanks for joining us in this chat. It was great having you guys around. And remember that we're going to be going live every single Tuesday and Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time to bring you Steelers coverage. We hope that you can join us there. Thanks for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks for joining us on the Steel Curtain podcast.